Voters in Cook County could play a key role in deciding whether Illinois becomes the next state to legalize recreational marijuana. The outcome of an advisory referendum could prompt state lawmakers to pass or reject pro-pot legislation. The Illinois Family Institute opposes legalization, and in this presentation, a panel of experts explains why legalizing new era, high potency, and highly addictive marijuana will destroy lives. It will also give families and employers more reasons to flee Illinois. Marijuana proponents promise jobs and tax money, but in reality, legalization is an addictions for profit scheme.
Thanks for being part of this special Illinois Family Institute Forum on marijuana. I'm Monty Larrick. I'm joined by David Smith, the Executive Director of the Illinois Family Institute and Illinois Family Action. Dave, Cook County voters will soon decide the fate of a non-binding referendum on whether the state should legalize the recreational use of marijuana.
That's right.
Why is the outcome of that vote so important?
I'll tell you what, the Cook County Board is trying to put pressure on the state lawmakers from Cook County. And it's designed, because half of the Illinois General Assembly comes from the Cook County area, it's designed to put pressure on these state lawmakers. Hey, look, the people back home want this, so get it done. And they're pushing and running ahead with this very fast. They're holding hearings. The very first hearing they held last year, April 1st, 2017, I kid you not, April 1st, they didn't let any of our folks on our side give their concerns or present any of the negative or the downside to legalizing marijuana in the state of Illinois. And unfortunately, a lot of the mainstream media is cheerleading this all the way. And so we need to try to circumvent the mainstream media and get the information directly to the voters. And that's why we're holding this forum, this webinar and we're going to do another one on February 6th with another group of experts to try to educate as many people in the state of Illinois, especially Cook County voters, on why marijuana legalization is just terrible public policy.
So Cook County voters need to say no on legalized pot.
That's right. The ballot is you're going to start it with gubernatorial races, and then the Illinois Attorney General race, and there's going to be a slew of other races on your ballot. Go all the way through, because there's drop-off in ballots, right? Go all the way through to the end and vote on that referendum. It's a non-binding referendum, but again, what it's going to be used for is to put pressure on our state lawmakers.
And if that vote is close,
right,
what will that tell lawmakers?
We can't get blown out. We simply can't get blown out on this vote. Christians and conservatives and common sense voters need to go to the polls and just vote no. And hopefully we'll make it close. It's kind of a foregone conclusion that Cook County might go the wrong way. But we're going to do our best to make sure it hit the red button.
Oh, right. Sorry about that.
So we're going to do our best to make sure that people are informed and motivated to vote no.
All righty. Sorry about that phone.
That's okay.
We have assembled a panel of experts who will explain why the legalization of marijuana will be bad for kids, bad for families, bad for Illinois. We'll be interacting with our panel and offer you the opportunity to ask some questions about our distinguished panel. Joe McGuire serves on the board of directors for the Drug and Alcohol Testing Industry Association.
Hello.
And she co-chairs the Marijuana Education Committee. Ms. McGuire is an accomplished writer and speaker, and as a native of Colorado, she has firsthand knowledge about the impact legal pot is having in her home state. Bill Genties is the project coordinator for the Lake County Underage Drinking and Drug Prevention Task Force, hosted by the Lake County Health Department.
Say hello, Bill.
How you doing?
Mr. Genties also manages the Lake County Opioid Initiative and the county's A Way Out program. He's a former two-term mayor of Round Lake. And James Kruger is the chief of police for the village of Oak Brook and is a 36-year veteran of the law enforcement. And Chief Kruger is the president of the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. He was recently selected by the Illinois Security Professionals Association to receive the Law Enforcement Official of the Year for 2017.
Thank you, Chief, for being here. He's the gentleman with the stars on his collar. That would be the Chief. So
He's got
say
the
hello,
uniform.
Chief.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Joe, recreational pot became legal in Colorado in 2014. From your perspective, how's it going? Here in Illinois, they're promising jobs and tax revenue. That was a promise in Colorado. Is that happening?
You know, it's very interesting. There have been some jobs created, but when you look up the entire number of full-time jobs in the state of Colorado, it's less than 1% of jobs that have been created. And my county that I live in is still far below the national average in job creation. We are below the national average in unemployment rates as far as hiring. We have a higher unemployment rate in my county than the rest of the state. So, you know, while you do have a few jobs created, is it the solution to a recovering economy? And the better question there to look at is, what is this costing Colorado? And
Right.
That's where we are failing in large part in the media to take a close look and determine that we're seeing emergency room visits go up in our hospitals. We're seeing fatal crashes increase in the state across the board, and those are specifically attributed to marijuana impaired driving fatalities. We're seeing higher dropout rates in high school of students. We're seeing higher expulsion rates of kids pertaining to marijuana related offenses. And the interesting thing about that is we constantly hear how this is not for kids, it won't get in their hands, you know, and the youth will understand that. Well, the youth or young people, they don't understand that it's not for them. What they perceive is that the adults said this is okay, so that means it's okay. They don't draw lines in the sand.
Exactly.
So-
Joe, we here in Illinois, we legalized medical marijuana in 2013. So the message we send to young people is it's okay. It's like medicine. Now we're pushing ahead with recreation, and it's sending that message. And of course, the marketing behind it will reinforce that, saying, hey, you can kick back and relax with some marijuana, just like you might do with a glass of wine in the evening.
Correct. And one thing that I want to point out, and I think we all need to keep on our radar, is that this marijuana legalization playbook is old. We've been here, done this before, and it was big tobacco. This is big tobacco 2.0. In the early days of rolled cigarettes, there were all of these ads about, and some of you are old enough to remember this, or maybe I should say mature enough. Doctors prefer Camels. Your dentist recommends Viceroys. There are ads that you can find on the internet for cigarettes that cure asthma.
So are you telling us that the experts were wrong once?
Right. And
So smoking is now good for you.
right. And so we called advertising science, and it worked for a long time. It was, simply anecdotal stories that the industry put out there to entice people to use their product. Now we know about tobacco-related illness and death. You know, you'll hear people say, well, it's safe because you can't overdose on pot. Well, who has overdosed on tobacco? When do you hear people overdosing on tobacco? You don't, but we know about tobacco-related illnesses, and we're keeping the marijuana industry is keeping a huge hush-hush around marijuana-related deaths. They do happen. They have happened. They are documented by the CDC. And so those are some things that we're seeing. But another thing that I also want to point out, especially for Cook County, I grew up just outside of Cook County in my childhood, and we are seeing a disproportionate number of marijuana retail facilities going into lower income neighborhoods and a higher rate of crime ensuing from that disproportion. Another issue is a disproportionate amount of racial inequity in who gets to be behind the dollars in those businesses, right? And so this is an industry that preys on lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. And I'm telling you what, Cook County does not need that type of industry coming in and preying on those young people and on lower economic status neighborhoods.
Illinois doesn't need that, you know. And regarding addictions, well, first of all, you know, tobacco, my dad died. He smoked 3 packs a day, died of emphysema at 58 years old. So, yeah, he didn't ever get high or, you know, but he didn't die from a cigarette. He died from the results of the cigarettes. But, Bill, what have you seen as far as addictions go?
Well, actually, Joe stole all my good lines.
Uh-oh.
But I would say the most interesting thing that I could add to that discussion is that we have this substance that's legal in this state already. It's called alcohol, and 42% of our 12th graders drink alcohol once every 30 days in the state, according to the Illinois Youth Survey.
Wow.
20% smoke marijuana on a regular basis or once every 30 days in the state. So, you know, one of the reasons for it, for alcohol, is because youth get a hold of alcohol from their parents. And it's, you know, if we increase the amount of marijuana, particularly legalized or medical marijuana, in this state, we're going to have more youth access to it. And addiction rates with a non-fully formed brain are crucial to, you know, preventing people from having substance abuse problems later on in life. There's a lot of correlation to mental illness, variety of other things. But I would also say there's a lot of data coming from not only Colorado, the state of Washington as well, around where youth get their marijuana from. And by and large, they get it from, in the old framework, the medical marijuana framework, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong on this, a lot of youth were reporting that they got it from legal medical marijuana card holders.
Absolutely.
And that's extraordinarily disappointing. And, you know, we have, and I know the chief, I'm sure, does compliance checks constantly for alcohol and tobacco because people sell to underage. And guess what? We're going to have that same exact problem inviting this into our state.
Chief, is that something you fear that will happen here in Illinois?
Well, we're convinced that there will be an increase in usage, and especially it'll become more prevalent because it'll be around. I'll tell you right now, and first I want to thank you for allowing us to participate in this program tonight. The Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police are vehemently opposed to recreational marijuana and all the concerns that we have with public and traffic safety. I think right now what we're finding is that there's a lot of apathy out there because of the misinformation or the belief that this isn't a big deal. Even in talking to the legislators, as I've been involved with some of the testifying in front of the General Assembly, is that they want to make it akin to prohibition. And
right.
That people are doing it anyway, so we might as well regulate it. Therefore, somehow it'll be safer if it's regulated, and the state will be able to gain some revenue from it. And, you know, we try to explain to them, you know, that some of the information they're receiving just doesn't add up. One of the things that they don't realize is that there is still going to be a significant gray market regardless of whether or not it's legalized. There are going to be people that aren't going to want to pay the taxes, aren't going to want to pay the surcharge, obviously, that a business would have to charge because they have rent and employees and so forth like any other business. And that gray market is still going to exist. What's been very interesting is there's been several occasions with my own staff where they've stopped or arrested somebody for possession of cannabis. In one case, and I had testified this to the members of the General Assembly, that the young man had actually asked if he could have it back after we were done writing him the tickets because he figured it was almost legal anyway. Just a couple weeks ago, we arrested an individual who had cannabis that was commercially packaged from Colorado in his possession here in Illinois. And we know that's been part of the story about all the outgrowth of cannabis that's come from the legalized states. So that's another big issue. We're, of course, concerned with the whole traffic safety piece and what that may lead, and certainly through the data that we're getting from states like Colorado and Washington are showing the fatal crashes go up. What we testified to, though, too, is that the data is tough to come by because I'll tell you, just even in Illinois, a typical DUI arrest, especially if there's the presence of alcohol with it, is that more likely than not, we may not know that there's the presence of cannabis in some of these arrests because we have breathalyzers, so we can test somebody right in the police station, be able to charge them, have the physical evidence, and then release them on bond. If we did have to determine the amount of cannabis in somebody's system, now we have to transport them to the hospital. We have to take a blood draw. We have to wait several weeks for that blood draw to come back because we know the crime labs are overburdened before we can even get the results. And that also means that one of my officers has been off the street for 3 hours or better. So that's been part of the problem as well. So, we've got some real concerns with it. We've heard from the Colorado chiefs, and we actually had one of their past presidents out here in Illinois just last April come and talk to us. And the fact is that they found that, for every lobbyist that the Colorado chiefs had, the cannabis industry had 20. Wow. And they were just spent, and there was just nothing they could do about it because of the misinformation. So that's been a big part of our problem. So that and about the only place that we can get decent information from is from HIDA, the Rocky Mountain HIDA group, because the feds at least will compile and get the accurate data where some of the state agencies have kind of, I won't say suppressed because I don't know that we can say that officially, but certainly in the state government is looking at it differently so that their figures may be a little skewed as well. But something that Joe had mentioned as well that we're concerned about is just recently, a couple days ago, the Democratic candidates for governor had a debate and talked about the legalization of cannabis. And a couple of the candidates even talked about the fact that they felt that the enforcement of cannabis laws have been disparate based on race. And of course, we're very, vehemently disagree with that statement as well. And it's very unfortunate. And if their argument is that legalizing this will be somehow more beneficial to some of the challenged communities, and in fact, is what was said prior this evening, is that that's where the cannabis retail outlets are going to be and going to be preying on those same folks that they claim that they're concerned about.
Well, to that point, Chief, real quick, we have an article on our website, illinoisfamily.org, written by a former Cook County prosecutor, Ed Rinkowski, who actually literally wrote the book on narcotics prosecution in the big county. And he wrote up and said it takes, on average, 5 arrests for possession before any person actually faces any real jail time. And then last year, our state lawmakers have passed a piece of legislation to decriminalize and make the penalties a lot more lax on possession of marijuana.
Get a fine.
To get a fine, right. So I mean, even with all that said, I mean, people have to understand first, the jails aren't filled with, small people with small amounts of marijuana in their pockets, right?
That's correct.
But as Joe pointed out earlier, this is going to be a scourge in certain communities, in certain minority communities. It is actually going to hurt them more than some of these folks who are complaining about social justice, including Cook County President Preckwinkle.
Joe, you mentioned about where these marijuana shops are located. Communities in Colorado can actually opt out of having a retail outlet in their community. But do you think, for instance, in Cook County, that these retail outlets will actually make it their way, for the most part, in the inner city, on the west side of Chicago, the south side of Chicago?
It's interesting as these laws and referendums and things go from state to state. What we've actually seen is that what I refer to as big marijuana, they are making it more and more difficult for cities and communities to opt out of retail stores. But you can guarantee that your large metro communities go all in. That's what we've seen with Denver. That's what we've seen with Pueblo. That's what we've seen with Boulder, Colorado. We've seen the large metro communities go, you know, we have to have this tax money, which, by the way, ends up being less than 0.1% of the entire budget.
Repeat that,
it's not-
Joe.
Sir?
What's that number again?
Less than 0.1%
Wow.
of the entire budget is.
So if our lawmakers really think that this is going to solve their revenue problems, they're
Right.
being misled.
Well, you know, there's actually a model for this, and I think I'm repeating myself again, but alcohol, only about 7% of the tax dollars that alcohol taxes bring in cover the amount of damage to society that it's caused with, you know, liver issues, you name it, DUIs, whatever it is. It only brings in 7% of the revenue. We have a second one, which is cigarettes. Cigarettes taxes only bring in about 15% of the actual damage they cause to society in terms of money.
So,
and,
Bill,
what are we going to have is a $1,000 joint to cover the budget shortfall. It's just ludicrous.
So, Bill, what you're saying is that we're potentially going to be adding more harms, more social costs, and not covering but a fraction of it.
Exactly. I mean, we have an opioid problem here in the state. We don't have enough beds. We don't have enough funding. Gee, I'm shocked. And guess what? I know that they're not going to put enough money to handle recreational marijuana issues down the road. Eventually, we will all suffer because of this.
One of the surefire deceptions that you can see when you look at these rules or laws or referendums, you know, there's a variety of disguises, I guess I would say. There is always an attempt, and usually successful, to allow people to grow pot or cannabis, marijuana at home. When you do that, you completely undercut the retail structure, you undercut the tax scheme, you undercut the whole system, you create a flourishing black market.
And the regulatory system as well.
Some people have referred to it as a gray market, but it's indeed a black market. And so you just simply perpetuate crime. So in Colorado, we are seeing police having to go in and bust these illegal home grows constantly because they're exceeding the amount they're supposed to be growing for personal use. They're actually distributing and promoting commercial sales right out of their houses. We're seeing a lot of theft. We're seeing a lot of gated communities that end up with high crime rates because people are setting up grow operations in those neighborhoods. The other thing is we have seen arrests go up of minority peoples in the state of Colorado, not down,
Why is that?
eliminated.
Why is that?
Right. Pardon me?
Joe, why is that? Why is the arrest going
Well,
up?
because the model that we're seeing come out and this quote solution that's being presented to the drug problem, it perpetuates crime. It perpetuates people are there's theft constantly of, and a lot of it is young people trying to break into these grow operations. But we've had cartels come into our neighborhoods and they're stealing each other's product. We're actually having cartel wars in our neighborhoods because other countries are coming here and setting up these grow operations and then they're battling it out, stealing each other's product.
You know, it's kind of funny that you bring that up. Why is it that the state of Illinois and the politicians of Colorado, Washington State, want to get involved in this industry that has been controlled by cartels and organized crime? It is. I don't know.
Do we think we can do a better job?
Do we? the criminals in Springfield? I don't know. I better be quiet.
Well,
Joe,
we have yet to regulate ourselves out of any major problem that we have. And the best example I can give you at this point in time is we have a pharmaceutical industry that is regulated out the toenails and an opiates crisis that is out of control. Has regulation solved that problem?
Oh, no. Joe, listen, I got to point out, too, you said that, or Monty said that certain communities can opt out of having these marijuana boutiques. Have many taken advantage of that? Many municipalities.
In Colorado, 2/3 of the communities have initially opted out.
Wow.
Now, many of them had sunsets and have to come back around and revisit it. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is the marijuana industry is coming into those communities and saying, you violated the will of the people, and they're trying to force re-votes in these communities because they want to open it up to the whole state. But we still have 2/3 of the communities in Colorado said no to retail. Now,
So wait a minute, though. Let me ask you this.
Personal use is legal in the entire state,
Sure.
but that the retail sales.
But, okay, so even though 2/3 have opted out, I've read recently that there are more marijuana storefronts than there are McDonald's in the state.
Yes, in the city of Denver, the city and county of Denver, there are more marijuana retail facilities than McDonald's, Walmart, and Starbucks combined by double.
So, Bill, that speaks directly to the availability of a very addictive substance, right? That is going to, pull people in. We're putting it right there for them.
Yeah. And, youth usage climbs when there's availability and addiction issues, one of the things that I've been most struck by in the data that I've seen is that if you're a persistent user of marijuana while your brain is developing, you can lose up to 8 IQ points. And, if you have an average IQ and you lose 8 IQ points, that puts you in the bottom 20th percentile of IQ. And you know what? You're probably working at one of those McDonald's saying, would you like fries with that? Because we're really doing a disservice to our youth because we're not giving them the opportunity to succeed. We're giving them something that will literally make them dumber. That's just appalling.
So the stereotype of Cheech and Chong isn't off base, is it?
No comment. I never saw those movies.
Okay.
So, Chief, if IQs are being lowered by this high-potency marijuana, that means more people not be able to hold a good job, and they're out there looking for ways to get money to pay for marijuana, burglarizing homes, etc. Right?
Breaking into cars.
Yeah, it's going to create a bigger market for the criminal. We're also concerned with the whole traffic safety piece, and with the whole issue of not being able to control the actual amount that somebody is holding is going to just exasperate this even further. And I think that you're going to see property crime go up, just as we've seen it now with the heroin crisis, has been mentioned before with the opiate issue. And that's what's been driving our residential burglaries and our vehicle burglaries across this whole region, coming out from the west side of the city into the suburbs, have been epidemic over the last, say, 6 months, the last 2 years too.
But Chief, when you hear Joe talk about drug cartel activity in Colorado, you have to be saying to yourself, I sure don't want that here in Illinois.
No.
Yeah.
And, and there's been some information out too on whether or not there's been less control of some of the alleged legal grow operations that are taking care of the medical marijuana facilities now as well, and whether or not they're actually accounting for everything that's coming out of there as well. So there's certainly going to be a huge potential.
Well, Monty brought up a good point with the high potency marijuana. I'm reading that they're even using high potency spray to spray on gummy bears with a little sugar coating, and it is so potent that you're only supposed to eat 1/4 of the gummy bear for a dose for an adult, and yet this stuff is available to kids, and they're eating multiple gummy bears like I probably would, and it's knocking them on their keister, or even sending them to the emergency room. That blows me away, first of all. Secondly, and you can talk about this, Chief, you brought up the highway safety. I'm concerned. I've got a wife with small children in a minivan on the roads, and we frequently drive the highways of Illinois. I really don't want her to be on the road with intoxicated people. Let me just say this. One of the arguments that pro-pot people have is like, it's just like alcohol. But it isn't like alcohol. Alcohol, we can sit down and Monty and I could share a dinner and a glass of wine and not be affected by alcohol one bit. Monty and I can't sit down and share a joint. Don't ask. And not be affected. We're going to get intoxicated. Alcohol's in and out of our system in 24 hours. Marijuana is in our system for 28 days or longer and can affect our fine motor skill for 72 hours. So you got somebody who's unwinding on a Friday night, smoking a joint, gets in the car Monday morning, and is on the road with our family members. And they don't realize that their fine motor skills, their perception is still being affected by the marijuana they smoked on Friday. And that alarms me. What say you, Chief?
Well, that's one of our huge concerns. You know, right now, of course, with alcohol, we have breathalyzer instruments that can measure the amount of alcohol that's in someone's bloodstream. We were very concerned last year because along with that decriminalization bill that passed also went into effect the amount of nanograms in somebody's system that was deemed to be a per se level for DUI. Just like everybody is pretty familiar with the 0.08 for alcohol, blood content, alcohol content in their blood. Well, General Assembly passed a 5 nanogram limit in a person's system for cannabis, and 5 nanograms is one of the highest levels in the country. And the AAA has had a lot of information out too nationwide that there is no real correlation by the amount of nanograms and the amount of impairment, that it's different from person to person. Along with that, we may be still several years away from any kind of reliable instrument that we can have at our disposal in the mobile platform to be able to test for it.
Well, that actually answers one of the questions we had on Facebook. Is there a way to test these guys? And you say we're years away from that.
All we can do is a blood test and take them, blood and urine test and take them to the hospital.
Is there a field test that you can give them to see if they're, coordinated?
They're experimenting with some of that stuff now as this is becoming more prevalent, but we're still several years away, is what we're told.
I'd like to add something.
Just to the presence, not the actual amount.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'd like to add something. When you said about, we have a drink right now and it's out of your system in 8 hours. And this is something, and I know it's being shown in Colorado a lot. In fact, Joe has a slideshow that I actually saw where I got a lot of really good stuff that I actually plagiarized. But what happens is if you smoke that joint tonight, you have marijuana in your system for 28 days. I get drug tested. I'm sure the chief gets drug tested. If we flunk a drug test, we don't have a job. And about 60 to 70% of the jobs in America drug test before hire. And some of the stuff that we're seeing, and especially in Colorado, the anecdotal stuff is terrifying. You're not getting good people. So you're looking for a truck driver with a CDL license, and you want to drug test them before you give them the truck. Guess what? No one's passing those tests. And fortunately, in Colorado, the state Supreme Court, I believe, would not allow the marijuana industry to prevent companies from testing for marijuana and using it as a condition of hire, because that's really important. Because who wants truck drivers driving around who are high, or any delivery driver, or anyone who uses a vehicle? Yeah. And this is a big deal. Machine shops, right, as a manufacturing center. This is a really big deal that we're inviting in. I mean, this is not a kid's thing, but this is an adult thing. Right. You're not going to be able to get good jobs.
So I would like to say about that the Canyon City Workforce Center, which is Southern Colorado, basically the unemployment office, they had openings for 3 commercial driver's licensed truck drivers. They interviewed 75 candidates before they could find 3 qualified drivers to pass the drug test. Now, what's important to know about this is 2 major things. Number one, CDL truck drivers are under US DOT mandatory drug testing programs, and they know that there is zero tolerance for them, period. And yet 75 of them, or let's say 72 of them, are pushing the boundary, right? 3 months, it took them 3 months to fulfill those positions. So even though they know that on paper it's zero tolerance, they're pushing rules. So there's an issue with finding qualified workers and having a hindered workforce for employers. The other piece of this that we can't forget is that the marijuana industry is working very hard to do away with workplace drug testing rights and to make it illegal to test in states where marijuana is legal. In fact, they introduced a bill in Oregon and Washington in 2016 to do exactly that. Both of those failed, but they will come back, and they are trying very hard to encroach on workplace, safe and drug-free workplace rights. So I really appreciate that that point was brought up, because this is a future issue. It's a horizon issue that we have to be paying attention to. And I know what the economy is looking like in Illinois, and this is, again, another thing that we cannot afford to do to this state.
Well, let me ask you about that. Some potential employer, let's say Amazon or whatever, they might say, well, do I really want to go to Illinois and have a workforce that is frequently buzzed? Or do I want to go to a state where pot is not legalized? You know?
Well, and backing up a little bit too, you know, what Joe said and what Bill said, you know, failing drug tests and workplace safety and not being able to hire people because they failed their you know, this begs the question, is this why we're seeing a increase in homelessness in Colorado? People are not able to work, and to my libertarian friends who think, you know, hey, individual freedom, do we realize this is going to expand the nanny state and welfare programs because we need to expand the safety net? Anybody want to talk about that?
Well, that's exactly what has happened, and I'll tell you, there's a couple of ways this is unfolding. We do have people that aren't continuing in jobs. We have kids that are getting out of college that can't get gainful employment, but we have a tremendous amount of people who are moving to Colorado because I can get pot there, and then they're shocked that they have to pass a pre-employment drug test. And you'll hear it all the time. It's not fair. You can't test me. It's legal here. No, our law says that we can. And I'll tell you, in Illinois, just by virtue of where you're located, you will have those same groups of people flocking to your state. And so our social services are absolutely taxed. Our homeless shelters are taxed. Our food banks are taxed. We cannot provide for the amount of people that we have. Our homelessness has increased dramatically. In fact, in my community of Colorado Springs, there have been headlines weekly over the last several months of fires that have been started, public fires, because of people in the homeless camps. And we never had homeless camps before. We've always had some homeless people, but now we have tent cities and public fires. Structures are getting burned down. We've had structures in public parks burned down because of open fires for people to stay warm in the wintertime. This is a serious problem, and it is definitely related.
Chief, that sounds like some problems that you don't want to have to deal with. You know?
No, you know, and the issue with the homeless in our state now, you know, trying to find beds for them in the evenings, you know, and police officers from all over the region that run across them and try to get these folks placed. And it's, you know, for that to increase at any significant level is going to be epidemic in proportion, because they're limited resources now.
Bill, here's a question from a viewer, and it pertains to something you said earlier. Are the statistics better, worse, or about the same for alcohol and developing brains? You were commenting about drug use among young people earlier.
No, that data is specifically, the data that I mentioned about the IQ loss is specifically for marijuana. It was done by the University of Dunedin in New Zealand. And it's been replicated at a couple other universities. Any substance in a developing brain, and by definition, a developing brain, your brain doesn't fully develop in a female until 24 and in a male till 25, go figure. And so that developing brain develops, a predilection towards the substance that it's being abused by. So, for example, if you start smoking a cigarette at age 14 and start smoking then, it's virtually impossible to quit. But if you start smoking as a 50-year-old, it's not hardwired into your brain. All substance abuse is like that. As to the specific IQ loss, I don't even know if that research exists. But I can tell you something. If you start drinking, for example, before the age of 14, you have a 50% chance of having an alcohol-related problem later on in life, i.e. becoming an alcoholic. If you start drinking at the legal age of consent, 21, you have about an 8% chance. That's a significant difference. And those are the type of things that you see and are statistically borne out. But as to that particular question, I don't really have any data that I can back up with that.
Joe, you talked about, we've talked about the high potency marijuana that's out there today. That's what we're dealing with now. The high THC levels. But it's my understanding that the marijuana industry is fighting against any limits on THC levels. Is that true?
Yes.
It's getting
That is
so
absolutely
concentrated.
the case. Yes, we actually had several groups and a variety of attempts in 2016 to limit the potencies on THC. What the ideology behind it was is we have, beer, wine and liquor, hard liquor. We have limits on the proof of alcohol. Some states have them on, even limited on Sundays or what stores can sell, you get the idea. So what the thinking was is in Europe, any potencies over 15%, which is 15, is considered a hard drug on par with heroin, and that's a criminal offense. So the decriminalization of marijuana, for instance, in Amsterdam is only up to 15% THC. So the thinking was Colorado should do something similar, limit it to 15%, and have classifications, under 10% might be considered one thing, and et cetera. And the marijuana industry, those lobbyists that you heard the chief talking about, boy, they came to the table, they fought it hard. I mean, they went, all the way, even to the point of prohibiting signature gathering for petitions for the state of Colorado for citizens to have an opportunity to vote on that. At the end of the day, we tried to take it through the legislature and get lawmakers to take a look at this. And the industry came back and said, we are willing to self-limit, but we want the limit to be at 90%.
Wow.
Which
Oh
really was just a joke.
Wow.
And there was a lot of pressure for those who wanted limits to agree to that because, hey, at least it's a limit. But really, it was just a mockery of the whole process. So the industry, what they said was, if we have to limit THC, you will kill the retail sales because the greatest selling products are the waxes, the dabs, the BHOs, the edibles. You'll kill the retail sales, will be relegated only to selling weed, and that's not the idea. So they don't want, this ideology here, it's not just about a little weed. It's not about a few joints. It's not about just the pot that we knew in the 60s and 70s. They are here for the dollars. They're here to make money. They're here to profit. It's profit for addiction. And they want everything they can squeeze out of us to be completely allowable and look the other way so that they can profit.
I want to take a moment here to pause and talk to our Facebook listeners. We've got a couple hundred people. And listen, if you want to send in a question, please send it in. We've already had two, and we'll submit it to the panel here. But I at this point, I want to look at the chief here And the lawmakers in Springfield a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago, played medical doctor and pharmacist in passing medical marijuana, despite the concerns of the FDA and the DEA, the medical and scientific experts over there. Will they listen to the law enforcement community? Will they listen to the men and women who are on the front lines in our communities protecting us and see what's going on in the culture?
Well, I know that it took them probably an extra 3 to 5 years to get medical marijuana, because the police chiefs were vehemently opposed to that as well, and worked very hard at trying to stop it as long as they could, where it just it got to be that freight train that we just couldn't get in front of anymore. And I know that in some of our discussions with some of the legislators, there's some that are listening, and I think that they're taking our concerns. What seems to be the issue is that when we bring up statistics and data that we have full faith and belief in, especially when it comes from places like Rocky Mountain HIDA, they'll bring up statistics from other groups that, especially even in the Colorado area, that may be slightly different, and some of them are trying to hang their hat on that.
Sure.
But we do have some folks in Springfield that are listening and are supportive. So we'll continue to work at that and continue to try to educate on what some of those concerns are.
What would you suggest to the moms and dads at home, the grandmas, grandpas, who are concerned about their families? Would you encourage them to speak out to their state lawmakers at this point?
Yeah, I think that's critically important right now, because what we're fighting is really that apathy I talked about before. When I know that some of the legislators are hanging their hat on there was a Paul Simon Institute survey that came out about 9 months ago now, that showed that it was about 65% of the residents in Illinois thought this was okay. And we don't know what the context that it was that the question was asked or anything, or just some of that information. I think that they believe that it's just that cannabis that they might remember when they were in high school 20, 30 years ago, and don't realize just. So they're under some false information, and I think that's been the biggest issue. So some of the legislatures, I think, are feeling that they have some cover if they believe that the majority of residents in the state think it's okay, and they think that then they can use that to help bail the state out financially.
Right.
So the more people that they hear from, the more constituents they hear from that, no, this is a big issue, and especially when you talk about the children and families and the public safety is we need them to really voice their opinion.
Well, you can get in contact with your state lawmaker by calling 217-782-2000 and ask to be connected to your state lawmaker. If you don't know who your state lawmaker is, go to the officials finder on the IllinoisFamily.org homepage.
It's a button on the right-hand side on the right, and just click that and put your address in, and it'll tell you who your state lawmakers are. And the number that Monty gave you is the switchboard in Springfield.
Right.
What was that number, Monty?
217-782-2000. I've used it enough. It's in my brain.
Anyway,
Bill.
I can answer on the policy aspect of this.
Yes.
Illinois would be the second state in the United States, and the first one just happened a couple weeks ago, where a legislature legalized marijuana. Every other legalization that's taken place in this country has come about because of a referendum where all the people in the state vote. You can't do that in Illinois because of the Constitution. So it has to be passed by legislators, and it's failed everywhere other than just recently in Vermont. And here's the thing, legislators generally across the country historically have done the right thing. And we need to make sure that what we believe is heard by our legislators. And you're right, I mean, the misinformation, all that stuff is going on right now. We as an organization in Lake County and in McHenry and some of the other organizations I work with, we talk to our legislature all the time about this. And we're always coming up, like the chief is, with oddball information that we get. And it's very important. And the other thing I would say, specifically revolving around policy, is it is illegal to possess, consume, or distribute marijuana in the United States of America. federal law. And what these states are doing is they're superseding federal law, or they're attempting to supersede federal law. And that's just wrong. And and it gives all these problems that are come up. Joe mentioned stuff about transportation. Well, we have other things. Guess what? The FDA has never, ever approved marijuana in any way, shape, or form. And our legislatures are saying we're smarter than the FDA. Well, that's nonsense. There's so much stuff around this from a law enforcement perspective. It's illegal in the United States of America. It's as simple as that.
You know, Joe McGuire, I've heard you say before that it's addictions for profit. And here in Illinois, I'd like to point to the fact that some of our lawmakers are pushing addictions for a revenue stream that is not going to solve anything. And if you've lived in Illinois any time at all, you know that the lawmakers in Springfield haven't been passing budgets that have been responsible. They've been spending recklessly and irresponsibly. So a new revenue stream isn't going to solve anything. It's only going to exacerbate what's already the problem down in Springfield.
And, Joe, they're going to have to set up a bureaucracy, an agency
Correct.
to regulate.
That is correct. You have to establish an entire oversight board or committee. And in Colorado, when we initially passed this law, there was no money to create that, what we call the Marijuana Enforcement Division. So what we decided, the way to resolve that is the state would pay for it for the first 6 years. And then after 6 years, it would have to pay for itself. Guess what? You know, we are only a few years into that. We have 3 more years to go before it even pays for itself as far as what we're throwing out for enforcement. And that office limps along. And that's one of the reasons we have an out of control system is, and I was in a meeting with 2 officers of our Marijuana Enforcement Division, and they stood up in front of us and said, you cannot regulate this, it's impossible. There are over 200 laws around this, and there's no way that we could get our hands around it. So we go on a complaint-based system, and all we're doing is responding to complaints. And what kind of a regulatory system is that? When you hear Colorado as the model, that is a very deceptive term. And I know the chief can't say that information is being suppressed, and I respect you for that, Chief. I've got nothing to lose. I live in my state, and I'll tell you, our lawmakers are bought and paid for, in my opinion, by big marijuana. They're taking that money in their PACs. That's what's getting them elected. That's what's keeping them in office. And they now feel that they have a sworn duty to protect marijuana and cover their butts rather than to do the right thing. I'll call them out on it all day long because I think it's wrong. I think it's dishonest. And in Illinois, you cannot afford those kind of dirty politics, and you would do well to shy away from this.
Well, we're all above board here in Illinois, as you know.
Is it fair to say, Joe, that George Soros is a big part of the funding behind big marijuana? And
Absolutely.
And George Soros
is
a socialist. He's got a socialist agenda.
Yeah, George Soros is the deep pockets behind this movement. He started the attempt of marijuana legalization using NORML as his tool back in the 70s.
And NORML is?
Yeah, they almost succeeded in the late 70s.
What's
but
NORML?
The way they tell it is a group of hysterical mothers who were worried about their kids being addicted to drugs, stopped them in their tracks.
Joe, tell us what NORML is. So the folks...
NORML is the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. There's a chapter in every state. They have a president in every state. Now they have 2 sister organizations that they have created. One is Marijuana Policy Project, and the other one is the Drug Policy Alliance. These are all funded by George Soros. That's where the lobbyists come out of, and it supports the entire legalization system in the United States. They write the proposed laws, the bills. They do it all. They're a vast machine.
Well, we have about 5 more minutes here. And Bill, I have a question. You deal with the opioid crisis.
Yes.
What's the connection between marijuana and the opioid crisis?
They're both addictive drugs.
And do people start out with marijuana and move their way up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Marijuana is a gateway drug, I think is probably where the question is coming from. There's a lot of data that shows that, starting off with that substance leads you to other substances. I get to sort of talk a little bit about the opioid aspect. We have one of the things I do is I manage the opioid initiative in our county, and I'm always aware of what's going on in terms of deaths. And every single person who dies in this county, I think 5 in the last year, had polysubstances in them. In other words, when they died, they had multiple addictive substances in their body. Marijuana was probably present in probably half of them. The rest of them had pain pills, alcohol, and heroin.
What do you say, Bill? What do you say to people who say that marijuana will help solve the opioid problem?
I just laugh because A, there's no science behind that, and B, why would you use another addictive substance to cure an addiction?
I would suggest they look to Colorado once again to understand that our opiates problem is increasing just like everyone else's. We have not resolved that issue with marijuana legalization. And in fact, in the workplace with workplace drug testing, when marijuana positives went up in 2013, so did all other illicit drugs. So it's not a solution, and that putting that out there is absolutely preposterous.
Good. Chief Kruger, the federal government is cracking down on marijuana, but the state wants to legalize it. Where does that put police?
Well, and also the marijuana boutiques cannot put the money in banks, right, or the FDIC banks.
It's a cash business.
It's a cash business, which is
because it's federally illegal.
Right.
So
that can cause some problems too with criminal elements.
So, Chief, back to that.
Well, I know
doesn't that
even
put you in a dilemma?
the medical marijuana outlets, because of that issue, a lot of them had hired some heavy security people because it was a cash business basically, and they could deposit the cash in a state chartered bank, and that was about all they could do. So that's been one of the concerns as far as the transfer of money. It's interesting. I was at a meeting a month and a half ago when the Deputy U.S. Attorney General Rosenstein came to speak to law enforcement. And I had point blank asked the question about assistance with marijuana, and because it is still federally illegal, and why we couldn't get any assistance from our federal partners. And basically the answer was that they were talking about that they would be involved with some of the large distribution or cartel type situations, but wouldn't intervene on a state level, even though for lack of a better term is that the state is trying to legalize something that's federally illegal.
Let me ask you this, Chief. I've heard the argument that, marijuana might actually be good for curbing some of the problems that we face in society. People mellowed out, less likely to be violent. What do you say to that?
I don't see where there's any indication that there's any data to prove that. I mean, most of the bar fights and domestic disputes and a lot of the people we arrest have been inebriated with alcohol, and certainly that's a suppressant. So if it doesn't happen with alcohol, I can't see how that would have any effect on lessening criminal activity with cannabis either.
And this final question for you, Chief. How do you keep legal marijuana out of your police department?
Well, even now with the medical marijuana, there is a carve out, thank God, for public safety, that public safety employees or their cannot have a medical card and cannot be caretakers either under the law. But it is a concern, as we've seen certainly over the last decade, even in our pre-employment testing and background investigations, is that there's been a different level of usage than might have been, when I first got on the job 30 plus years ago. So that's a concern. I think a lot of agencies are going to random drug testing, but that all has to be worked out through union contracts too. It's just one method just to safeguard and make sure that it's one way to keep people from thinking about it. But if it became legal and more prevalent, and it's in the homes of families and friends, and it is a concern.
Bill and Joe, I'd like you to send a message to lawmakers and to the public about legalization. What should folks be telling their lawmakers? What should folks be telling their kids about legalization? Bill, why don't we start out with you?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to educate educate yourself, then educate your legislators. As for your kids, have conversations with them on a regular basis. Don't have a 60-minute conversation. Have one 60-second conversation 60 times. Talk to your kids. Tell them what's acceptable, what's not. Monitor what they do.
That's good advice. My dad swore that he'd kick my tail if he ever caught me smoking cigarettes, and I believed him. So, and he told me that more than 60 times. So.
Joe, what do you want to say to our folks viewing tonight?
It's so hard to be concise on this, but I know that that's what we have to do to get people to listen. But marijuana is not safe. It's not harmless. It does bring harm. It is addictive. It is impairing. And overall, my message would be, we do not want drug money. It's not the solution, and we do not want our kids seeing that we're going to rest our hats and our hopes on selling more drugs just for the possibility of a buck. It's not the solution. There are other ways to create solutions. This is not it. And it's a false paradigm to say that we either suffer with a drug problem or we legalize all drugs. There's a huge middle ground. There are many, many other solutions. This isn't it.
That's it.
Chief, as the president of the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, you want folks to vote on that referendum in March?
Well, we certainly want them to please vote no. One of the things and we've been very pleased to be part of, is a coalition of law enforcement, safety, treatment folks, and organizations such as yours through a group called Illinois Partners. And right now what we're trying to do is get a public information campaign going so we can get the word out to more people so that they understand and they see some of this information. So we would, unfortunately, because as with a lot of things, it costs money. And so I know that there's a desire to try to raise funds to help with this so that way we can reach the most amount of people when it comes to getting things in media. So that's probably where we need the biggest help right now to try to get the word out and to please educate for those folks that aren't sure or think they know a little bit about this topic, because they really need to educate themselves.
That's right.
And get out there because the information is there.
Thank you.
Well, let's figure out now, where do we go from here? How can people get educated? What's your contact information? Joe,
yeah.
Let's start out with you.
Joe, J-O, at joemcguire.org. And that's JOMCGUIRE, Joe at joemcguire.org.
Good.
Chief?
You can get us from our website. It's ilchiefs.org, ILCHIEFS.org.
And Bill?
Mine is WGENTES at drugfreelakecounty.org.
drugfreelakecounty.org.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of announcements real quick. We do want to remind Cook County voters that on the March 20th ballot, there will be a question, non-binding, should Illinois legalize recreational marijuana? We want you to vote no to that. Also, we're having Soldiers of the Cross events coming up on Thursday, February 8th, downstate in Collinsville, and then in central Illinois in Peoria. And then we're coming back up here to Hoffman Estates and in Orland Park. If you want more information about that, go to our website, illinoisfamily.org, click on events. And then that Saturday, February 10th, we're also having our 4th annual Worldview Conference. This year, we're bringing in John Stonestreet, who, if you listen to Moody Radio, Moody Broadcasting, you've heard him frequently on there. So, with that being said,
And our voter guides will let you know where the candidates for office stand on marijuana.
That's right. We have an election coming up, and IFI has voter guides. If you'd like a voter guide, send us an email at contactus at illinoisfamily.org. Contact us at illinoisfamily.org. So with that, I want to thank Bill and Joe and the Chief so much for spending an hour, a little more than an hour with us tonight. And hopefully this will go far and wide and reach more people. Thank you for your time, guys.
God bless.
God bless you.